Well, yes, I'm back. Today I'm going to be using a Pebeo glass paint outliner to create some lettering that we'll eventually place onto glass bottles. I've used this outliner before, but only for straight lines, so lettering is definitely going to be a bit of a challenge for me, but we'll see how it goes, and hopefully this will give you a few helpful tips for your own projects. So I've printed my lettering to the right size so that I can use it as a guide for my paint, so I can kind of trace over it. Now, if you're working on something like a vase or a drinking glass, you could cut the design out and place it inside the glass to trace over. I've heard that works really well, but we're not doing that today because there's absolutely no way that I can get my printed paper inside these bottles. So maybe that's one for a future project. Today what we're going to do is we're going to paint the outline onto a flat piece of glass first, and then we're going to transfer the lettering onto the bottles once it's dry. I'm using the Pebeo Vitrea 160 outliner in black. Now, the packaging used to be quite difficult to open and scissors were definitely required, so I'm glad they've improved the packaging on this one. Once it's out of the packaging, all you need to do is pull off the cap, unscrew the nozzle and pierce the foil seal at the top of the tube. Now, you're going to need something pointy for that. Scissors, a craft knife or even a nail, just something that's strong enough to really break through that seal properly. For my flat surface, I'm using a small glass insert from some unused photo frames. They are perfect for this. If you haven't got a spare photo frame, you can pick one up at a charity shop or a thrift store, perfect for this kind of project, and you can reuse the glass for your future glass projects as well. Now, if you've never used one of these outliners before, I would really recommend that you practice with some straight lines first, because it does require a very steady hand. When applying the outliner, I found it works much better if you lift the nozzle about 4 to 6 millimeters above the glass. Don't rest it on the surface of the glass. You want the paint to kind of just fall gently onto the glass. So it really is a delicate balance between the right squeeze and the right speed. It also really helps to have your arm fully supported and resting on the table. If your arm is just kind of hovering and floating above your work, you'll notice it immediately because your lines will become wobbly and uneven. The paint itself is quite thick as it comes out the tube. So hold the tube comfortably with your arm fully supported and squeeze slowly to push the paint through the nozzle. And all we're doing is painting over the printed lettering as carefully as we can. Now, my usual flowing line method of 4 to 6 millimeters won't quite work here because these numbers are quite small and they don't cover a large enough area. So this is genuinely much more difficult than drawing straight lines on a piece of glass. Also, I should mention that on the first squeeze, or whenever you start squeezing again after a break, the paint can sometimes buckle under itself. If that happens, don't try and put it down on the glass, just wipe it away with a piece of tissue or kitchen towel and start again. And work slowly. If the squeeze stops producing paint, lift the nozzle away, wipe off any excess and begin again with a clean nozzle. I'm moving quite slowly to kind of just control where the paint is going to fall, but because it's thick it does respond fairly well to careful movement. These numbers are a bit thicker or wider than the paint that's coming out of the nozzle, so I'm going to have to build up the layers to make them thicker. So yeah, I think we're just going to have to see how well they blend together. Sometimes the paint buckles if the squeeze pressure isn't consistent, and with these small shapes it really is harder to maintain that steady pressure. So instead of those long flowing lines that I showed you in my previous video, I'm applying small sections of paint just to try and get around all of the curves neatly. Now it does look a little bit bobbly at the moment, but I'm not actually too worried about that. One, because this paint does self-level a little bit, and two, because we can tidy up any small imperfections later once it's dry. The important thing is that we can't see any obvious join marks and that the outline dries smoothly. Thankfully, these numbers are fairly straightforward to follow. It is taking quite a bit of concentration, and I'm getting a few uneven edges and a few small blobs, but yeah, as I said, I'm really not worried about that because we can trim back any imperfections with a craft knife once everything is dry. I'm not entirely happy with that 0. My hand is slightly shaking here, and that's because I haven't properly supported my arm on this bit, which is exactly what I told you to do earlier. Yeah, not taking my own advice again. Yeah, so I've run out of room for the 5. That's okay, I'm going to place it slightly higher on the glass because I'll be peeling these numbers off later, and as there'll be individual numbers, the layout doesn't really matter at this stage. So there we go. I mean, the 5s look quite good, don't they? I'm just going to fill in that small gap on the 0. And whilst that's drying, we'll move on to the lettering, which I think is going to be a little bit harder actually, because these lines are a lot thinner. And yes, I am sorry, I blocked the camera with my hand. But it's the same process. Hold the nozzle just a few millimeters above the glass and let the paint fall gently onto the surface. If you get a buckle, wipe the nozzle and start again. Looks like I've still got a bit of a shake with my hand, and I've got a few little blobs appearing. So unless you've been doing this for years and years and years, you are going to get some blobs. Try not to worry about them too much at this stage, just carry on and we'll see how it levels out as we progress with the work. But here's the beauty of working on a flat piece of glass. If you go terribly wrong, you can wash it off and start again. So some of these joins do look a little bit harsh at the minute, but again, because I know that this glass paint does kind of self-level slightly, it will soften out when it's dry. I think the hardest part of this lettering is just how fiddly it is. There's a lot of curves, there's a lot of flow, and some of these letters are barely bigger than my fingernail. And the outliner only comes with one nozzle size, so yeah, I think If I was to do this again, I'd choose a much simpler font, nothing too thin, nothing too decorative. The numbers were definitely easier to do than this lettering. If you stop and start because the paint buckles, you'll likely create a small blob. I'm going to try and stay calm about this one, and if it happens to you, I hope you do too. We'll see how it looks when it's dry. Yeah, it's quite difficult to record glass when you're on camera with all the reflections and everything. So yeah, thank you for bearing with me. So as you get through the tube of paint, it will start to indent in the middle, which makes it much harder to maintain that steady squeeze. It's a little bit like a tube of toothpaste. So if you do need to kind of move the paint towards the nozzle again, put the lid back on. Don't roll down the end of the tube too tightly. Just kind of squeeze the paint down the tube, kind of just flatten it out a little bit just to move some of the paint forwards. But do make sure there's some space so that it isn't under too much pressure. Right, well, I mean, for a second attempt that doesn't look too bad, and I'm fairly confident I can tidy that up once it's dry. But yeah, if you really are truly unhappy with your result at this stage, you can wash the glass paint off with a little water in the sink. If you are happy, leave it to dry for about 2 to 3 hours, but don't leave it in direct sunlight, and don't leave it for weeks and weeks and weeks before moving to the next stage, because these paints do harden over time and they can become naturally brittle even if you haven't baked them. So we want them to dry, but we want them still flexible enough to transfer to the glass. So I wouldn't recommend leaving them for more than 24 hours. So these are now completely dry. They're not perfect, but I am fairly happy with them. The paint has actually self-leveled quite nicely, and I can't see those joins that were really obvious when it was wet. So this is a little bit more fiddly than trimming the straight lines, but we're going to give it a go. So I'm quite happy with the 2 and the 5 and the 1, but the 0 isn't great. But I'm going to start with just tidying up the 2. I can see a slight wobble here, so I'm making a firm but straight cut. And then gently lifting the excess away. Hopefully you can see how that's kind of smoothed off the edge a little bit. I'm analysing each piece very carefully, looking for any small bumps that just need smoothing out. Push the knife down until you feel the glass, and then carefully slice away what you don't need. Now the paint feels slightly rubbery, but it cuts quite cleanly, and the offcuts kind of just peel away. Yeah, I'm not sure I can fully salvage this 0. So I'm just going to briefly fast forward now. I really wasn't happy with that 0, so I did redo it. But first I'm going to tidy up the lettering. Again, I'm scanning for those really tiny imperfections and just trimming them away. Even the smallest correction can really make such a huge difference to the overall look of the lettering, and it is absolutely worth taking your time at this stage. And I hope that you can see that although the lettering looked quite messy when it was wet, once it's dry and once it's trimmed, it looks so much more crisper. So I already transferred the numbers onto the bottle and I completely forgot to press record, but I wasn't happy with the 0, so I did redo the 0 and I can show you the placement of that. So all you need to do is just using your fingernail, pull the lettering away from the flat glass. Don't pull too hard because you don't want to distort the lettering. If you feel any resistance, find another point and pull from there. Once you've got it off your flat glass, you can position it onto your curved glass and you simply need to just lay it in place and press down firmly. And it is as simple as that. I say that. It's simple when you've got individual letters. The October, however, apart from the O at the start, the rest of it is all joined together. So, yeah, removing the lettering from the flat glass was really quite difficult actually. Mostly because it was really fiddly and there was a lot of it. And again, I had to be very careful not to pull very hard, because if you do stretch this, it will distort and it will ruin the effect completely. As soon as you feel any resistance, stop and work from another area. The aim is to kind of loosen it gradually without breaking it. But this lettering is so delicate, it's so fine. And you've also got to be careful not to let it stick to itself, because sometimes that means you're having to pull it quite hard to get it apart. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend a nice script like this. Try and pick some lettering that's got some breaks, because that is so much easier. Once you've got it free, start in the middle and align the lettering with your guide. Try not to stretch it whilst you're positioning it down on the glass. You can make small adjustments, it's totally fine. And when you're happy with the placement, press it firmly down onto the bottle. So I'll remove the masking tape and I'll position this O. And once again, I'm just going to gently peel it away from the glass and place it carefully in place. Now this is definitely not a job for someone who hates fiddly work. I wouldn't have chosen this script by choice, but it was the same lettering that I used for the welcome canvas for the wedding and all the other trimmings, so I wanted this to be right, really. So once everything's in place, press it all down firmly. And at this stage, you can either leave it as it is, or if you want some permanence, you need to bake it in the oven. The outliner will harden over time without baking, but baking really does help reduce that risk of chipping. All you need to do is place them in your oven, turn the oven on at 160 degrees for about 45 minutes, put the timer on so that it will ding and turn the oven off, and just let the oven cool naturally. And once the oven has cooled down and the glass is nice and cool, you can remove them from the oven. So yeah, just to summarise, practice and don't be too hard on yourself, because this is not an easy craft. I'd recommend that you choose a font that isn't too fiddly. Scripts are fine, but if you have individual letters, that would be so much easier. I mean, I didn't really encounter any problems apart from the fact that a couple of my letters weren't particularly great, But you know, I could redo those if I choose. It didn't take too much time. It was less than an hour to do the whole project, apart from the drying time and the cooking time. But the actual writing of the letters, that was all done in under an hour. And then maybe another half an hour just for tidying up all the letters before I applied them to the glass. But yeah, a fun little project. I hope you found this video useful, especially if you're thinking about trying glass lettering for yourself. If you've got any tips or tricks of your own, do share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what works for you, and your thoughts not only help me, but they'll help other people that are coming to look at this video later as well. But anyway, yeah, thank you for spending some creative time with me today, and I hope to catch up with you again soon.